Hey guys, welcome to the Whip Week Roundup. So, I've cast on a lot of things and want to share them with you. So, I've decided that this podcast episode format will be a review of what's on my needles. I would like to welcome you to the Brownberry Chronicles podcast. My name is Mars. You can find me on all the social media sites as heyBrownBerry. Put that right here so you can see and connect with me. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I talk about creating, making, anything that I find interesting. There's a lot of knitting content right now. Some sewing content is creeping in. And sometimes I explore other ways of being creative. I really appreciate you spending some time with me. This time around, I'd like to share with you a few of my works in progress, my whips. I was thinking everything is more fun with company. I say that all the time. So I thought I would talk about all the things that I've been casting on and share with you what I'm learning as I work on these projects. And hopefully you'll enjoy keeping me company while we go through that. I certainly love seeing all the things that you're working on. So let's go for it. I think if I take them one at a time, it just makes it really easy for you to follow along with me. I hope that's the case. I'm just joining a group of a lot of makers in this season, which is early fall for us here, that get cast-on-itis and want to make all the things. I know some people are in full swing with their holiday gifting, their holiday gift making. And some of us are casting on more things to knit or crochet because the weather is changing and we want to have some cool weather accessories and garments. And some of us, like me, are just casting on because the mood has struck me. So my first project that I'm going to review, and these are in no particular order, is a pair of socks I'm working on. So these socks, let's see what's the best way to show them to you. Let's try this, because they're still on the needles. So these socks are being done in two colors. You can see the cuff is done in a gray called Smoke, and the body of the sock, the main parts, are being done in a color called Forest Green. This is a yarn that was new to me as of this year. It's Briggs & Little Durasport, and I bought it while on a trip to Toronto, and I've made one other pair of socks with it already, and I'll insert a picture of that here. So my daughter, Adachi, and I decided to work together in a little mini knit-along, just a knit-along with the two of us, because she was working on a pair of socks. And I wanted to make the same pair along with her. They're called the Chittery Chattery socks, and I will link to that pattern on Ravelry in the show notes. It was a really interesting knit working with two colors. My daughter and I actually each made a pair, and we've talked about that pair in previous episodes. And I just thought, I love this idea of the two colors in sock, and I wanted to work with some of the same yarn that my daughter had used in her pair, which was this Briggs & Little Durasport. So then I made myself a pair. I'll sit back a bit so you can see them. And these are in the same colors of Smoke and Forest Green that I'm working with right now. Only these socks have some patterning on them, which is a garter rib stitch from the Sensational Knitted Socks book. I'm looking around because I had that with me here. One second. So that pattern, the garter rib stitch, is from this book, Sensational Knitted Socks. by Charlene Schurch. I've never been sure how to say that name. I love this book. It has so many options for patterns, stitch counts based on your gauge, and each section tells you if it's a 4-stitch or a 6-stitch or an 8-stitch pattern, so you can decide based on your cast on number what look you're going for. And then you can just pick a pattern that you like and follow the repeats. Love it. It's been a really good resource. So the garter stitch rib, I did a 2x2 cuff garter stitch rib on the leg and the top of the foot. I kept the same yarn color down to the toe and just did a contrast for the cuff and toe. And I really enjoyed these. They did loosen up quite a bit, so I'm learning about this yarn. After being washed, they got a little bit loose, which is okay. They're not loose enough to slouch down now. But I learned about working with the Durasport, and I was happy with the gauge that I got on the 2.75 millimeter needles, which is how the second pair came about. And this time I just wanted to go plain vanilla. So I loved those socks, and while making them, I really enjoyed using this yarn. If I put it up a little closer, you can see even within the green, there are little tweedy speckles of gray, brown, even red shows up every now and then. And the two together are just right up my alley. I love them. It is a pretty scratchy yarn, I'm not gonna lie. Its content, just looking on here, is 80% pure wool and 20% nylon. It is a single ply yarn, which I'm finding I like knitting with a lot more. Single ply yarns are just, I don't know, there's something about the feeling of them in the hand that I'm really enjoying. And like I said, with the 80% wool, and it's not a merino soft kind of type of wool, it might be a little scratchy for some people, but I love them. What's special about this project? Because each of my projects has a story, just like each of yours probably has a story too. I have been trying all year long to find my sock formula. I hear people talk about their sock formula or their go-to pattern, the method that they like to use, whether top down like these or toe up, the needles that they love, and the number of stitches they cast on for sizing, and even the types of heels and toes that they love. I want to find that formula for me. I've knit many pairs of socks, some of them with no pattern like these, and some of them with patterning, lace, cables. But I'm really using socks now as mostly in between projects. So I'll pick up and cast on socks like these because I like to have something that I can grab and go. But in order to make them relaxing and fit well, I'm looking for that formula. In these socks, I actually cast on 52 stitches, which is an uncommon number, meaning that in most patterns you'll see a cast on recommendation for 56 stitches or 64 or even 72. This is a sport weight yarn. As I showed you on the label, it's Durasport, and so that means the gauge is a little heavier, and it's being knit on currently on my Knit Picks needles, which are 2.75 millimeters. I find that gives me a good stitch gauge, and when I put it on, it doesn't stretch too much, and I know from my previous socks that it will bloom a little bit and fluff up after a wash. But as I was doing the cuff, which is just a 1x1 rib, and then moving into the body, I really don't like the leg part of my sock to be slouchy. So I went down from 52 stitches, and after a few inches, you can even see where it pulls in a little bit, I went down to 48 stitches. That part of my leg is a little slimmer, and so I like the fit of a few less stitches there. And then I had to do some manipulation when I got to the heel. I'm doing a slip stitch heel and a gusset, which those of you who've knit socks before are familiar with. And I just worked through the numbers with the 48 stitches, had to do a little bit of manipulation. I knit about 26 rows on the heel, and that was mainly because how long I wanted the gusset to be when I ended up picking up stitches along the selvage edge. Now, if you haven't knit socks before, I apologize if some of this just sounds like a completely different language to you, but if you haven't knit socks before, maybe this will encourage you. They have a really cool construction. No matter how you knit them, there's so many options. I highly recommend them as a knitting project. But as I was going along and working on things like the heel and the gusset, I came out of that portion of the sock and into the foot, and I was finding that the 48 stitches that I was using at that point on my foot were now starting to really stretch and show a little bit too much gapping in the fabric on the foot part. So the stitch count was great for the leg, not so great for the foot. So I had to modify that. And in order to do that, I just essentially, you can maybe even see it because these are unblocked. Essentially, I had to start increasing a little more on the foot after I finished my gusset decreases. So you know, as you're doing a gusset, you have a lot more stitches on the needles. And I considered at one point just leaving that number of stitches and making the gusset a little shorter, but I tried that and I didn't like it. I didn't like how it made the heel fit. So I went through the full reduction in the gusset to create that sizing, back down to the 48 stitches. And then after a couple of inches, I started increasing again for the foot. And that's actually working out perfectly. So what have I learned from this so far? A couple of things. I've learned that if I really want a sock that fits well in the leg and the foot, I'm probably going to need a different stitch count from my cuff to my leg to the foot, which may seem kind of fiddly, but I feel like once I know that and it works out a couple of pairs at a time, it'll be easy. It won't be a lot of thinking to it. I've also learned the reason I have these Knit Picks needles in there now, different from where I started, which was with the Knitter's Pride carbons. I've learned that when it comes to needles for me, there's probably always going to be some kind of trade-off. I bought the carbons because I heard other podcasters talking about them. These are also 2.75 millimeters. And with this yarn being a pure new wool and pretty grabby, there was just way too much drag on these carbons for me. So I noticed it, not too long after starting the sock, but I kind of limped along with it until I just thought, these socks could be done by now. They're just vanilla stockinette stitch, knitting round and round, and I don't feel like I'm moving very quickly on this first one. So I decided to switch out from the carbons and move to the Knit Picks for the smoother all metal needle shaft. But the universe craves balance. So what I gained in slipperiness on the needle, I lost in pointiness by using the Knit Picks. It may be hard to tell, but the Knit Picks just are a tiny bit more blunt. And so where I'm not having to push stitches along the shaft of the needle, I am having to kind of use the point on the Knit Picks and grab a stitch a couple of times and make a few attempts at getting into a stitch because they're a little more blunt. They're not as sharp as the carbons. So it's a trade-off. I'm going to keep going on some rows. I'm sure I'll make it all the way to the toe on this one. And then after this sock, got to do number 2. So I'll make a decision after that whether or not I'm going to switch back to the carbons in favor of the pointier tips. With each of my projects that I'm making this year, either intentionally or accidentally, I've been learning a new technique, a new methodology, and in some cases I've just been thinking differently about these projects. Socks can be very simple, but if you want them to, they can be a really good palette for learning a new stitch technique. They can help you design if you want to branch out into designing. It's a really small, controlled space to try out a design. And they're just very comfortable to wear. So things like sizing and fit, you can explore that a little bit deeper without the big math that comes with a sweater. So that's my review for this particular work in progress. I call them my DuraSport traveling socks because I take them around with me as my on-the-go knitting project. I want to say thanks to Kim the Crafty Nomad. I'm pretty sure she's the one who provided us this cute little stitch marker to one of my daughters. So I'm borrowing it right now. So thanks so much for taking a look, and I hope you enjoy the next project segment. I'm glad you stuck it through with me to learn a little bit about my sock work in progress. This is part 1 of my WIP Roundup. So check out part 2 for the next project that I review. It may be something that's on my needles or something that I'm sewing or even a drawing. I don't know yet. I'll see when I create that segment. I appreciate you spending this time, and I hope that you're enjoying whatever your works in progress are right now. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Feel free to comment on this video. If you're working on socks or anything else and want to tell me about it, I'd love to hear it. So like, subscribe, and comment freely and connect with me online. See you again soon.